Hi, Shannon Looney here. I'm going to discuss a little bit more about our topic on transportation and the market economy. Today we're going to look at a couple of things such as the variables that we utilized, the data sources themselves, as well as the data, and the statistical implications of what everything means. So in terms of variables, we're going to be looking at unemployment, which is the number of unemployed people within the transportation sector itself. For employment, we're going to be looking at that in terms of employed numbers of persons within the transportation sector. For gross domestic product, or GDP, we're going to be discussing the total value of goods produced and services provided in the U.S. from the transportation sector. For Consumer Price Index, or CPI, it is a measure of the average change over time in the price paid by an urban consumer for market basket of consumer goods and services. CPI for transportation in the U.S. is the average price data for select transportation utilities, such as automotive fuel, food items, and deliverable goods. That means anything that we, the consumer, are buying and taking out or utilizing the transportation sector by obtaining a good or service provided, and what that price or the inflated price of that means. For data sources, we needed credible sources that had reliable information. For GDP, we obtained our data from the United States Department of Transportation, the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, as well as the UN Data Bank. For CPI, we utilized FRED. For unemployment, we looked to FRED and the World Bank. For employment, we utilized FRED and the UN Data Bank. In terms of data, we're looking at everything annually. For GDP, we are discussing it in terms of billions of dollars. For CPI, we're looking at it per 100 units. And for levels of employment and unemployment, we are going to be discussing them per thousands of persons within the transportation sector. So on to the statistics. Before we get too deep in the analyzation of everything, just a couple of brief definitions. The mean is the average where you add up the numbers within a set and divide that number by the amount of numbers within the set itself to give you the average overall. This gives us a good idea of what it means for this specific variable, what the normal amount is, and how to observe it that way. The median is the number in the middlemost of the number set. That's directly halfway between from 1988 to 2017, the number halfway in between. So our maximum value is the greatest value within the set itself, so the highest valued number. The minimum value is the opposite of the maximum value, which is the lowest or the smallest value within the set itself. The mode is the number which appears the most often in a set of numbers. For unemployment, we are going to be seeing that the values for this specific set is the mean, or the average number of people that are unemployed at a given time, is 49,521 individuals. The median, or the middlemost number, is 11,017. The maximum that we see of unemployed individuals is 165,254. The minimum value is 7,163 individuals. The mode, or the number that appears most often within the set itself, is 11,017. For levels of employment, we're going to see that the mean, or the average level of employment over the past 30 years, is 2,948,623 people. The median value is 13,171,878 people. This is the middlemost number that was observed. The maximum value that we see of people being employed within the transportation sector is 13,907,014 individuals. The minimum or the lowest amount of employed persons within the sector was 11,866,812. The mode, or the number that we observed most, was 13 million. For GDP, we observed that the mean or the average value produced from the transportation sector in terms of billions of dollars is 11,697. The median is 11,197. This is the number that we observed in the middle of the data set. The maximum, or the greatest amount of GDP that was observed, was 19,485. The minimum value is 19,485. The mode, or the number that was observed most often, was 19,485,000. Again, we are observing this data in terms of billions of dollars. So the thousands that I gave you needs to be multiplied in terms of billions of dollars to actually obtain the real value. For CPI, the Consumer Price Index, in terms of 100 units, we can see that the mean, or the average number that was observed, is 2.2329. The median, the middlemost number that was observed, is 2.8996. The maximum value that was observed was 9.7003, and the lowest value that was observed was negative 8.1497. The mode, or the number that was observed most often, was 9.703. So next is the correlation coefficient. Just to give you a definition of what this means, the correlation coefficient is the statistical measure that calculates the strength of a relationship between the relative movements of two variables. The values range between -1 and 1. A calculated number greater than 1 or less than -1 means that there is an error in the correlation measurement. A correlation of -1 shows a perfect negative or non-correlation, while a correlation of 1 shows a perfect positive correlation. A correlation of 0 shows no relationship between the movement of the two variables. When observing our data, we decided to look at the relationship between GDP and unemployment, GDP and employment, CPI and employment, and GDP and employment, and find what relationship exists between these four sets of variables. So for GDP and unemployment, we observed a correlation coefficient of 0.7917, which indicates that there is a strong relationship on unemployment's impact on the gross domestic product within the U.S. for the transportation sector. We also observe that the relationship between GDP and employment, while it does exist, is weaker than the bearing of unemployment. The correlation coefficient for this is 0.2413. We can also see that CPI and how it's affected by unemployment has a strong relationship, with a correlation coefficient value being 0.8469. Furthermore, we see that the relationship between employment and CPI is actually, while it does exist, is weaker than the relationship that is had with unemployment, in that its value is 0.1639. So while it does exist, it is a weaker value than the levels that we see between unemployment and these values. Thank you, and see you in a little bit to discuss more in-depth analysis of what is to come from all of these calculations and variables.